And I think we're live. Well, look, welcome everyone into the next episode, this current episode of the Brilliantio Show. And I'm absolutely delighted to have with us today Peter Le Breton, or perhaps it should be Le Breton. In fact, Peter, why don't you tell us about the name a bit? Where does your name come from?
I have a long ancestry which goes right back to the Channel Islands and Brittany before that, I believe. And I do know that my headmaster, or at least my English teacher at school, used to rather like my name. And so he insisted on calling me Pierre Le Breton. We have a son, actually, Jean-Pierre Le Breton, who, unfortunately, because Australians don't much like or have, very monolingual here, he very soon reduced it to JP. We were somewhat disgusted by JP's as a name, but we've got used to it and we accommodate him these days.
But are you a French ancestry then? Is that where the name originally comes from?
Long way back. I like to think I was associated with Lily Langtry, the flaming redhead who has a casino, or had a casino named after her in Las Vegas, but I don't think that's the case. I have a much more pedestrian background with an Anglican dean on the island of Jersey.
Mm-hmm. Right. I was about to say we were about to unlock some wonderful sort of Casablanca story here, weren't we? Well, look, you're joining us here today because you've made an online course called The Sky's the Limit. Now, it's all about learning, the joy of learning, and activating your learning. But first of all, I guess I ought to ask you, why did you give it that title? Why was that the title you chose for the course?
Well, several reasons. I think probably the biggest reason is that it captures for me something that I've become increasingly aware of, and that is that many of us have this tendency to underrate our potential to do things and achieve things. And in fact, what I've learned is that we really do not know what we're capable of until we give it our best shot and our best effort. And there are all sorts of social factors that come from family and schools and so on, which make it hard for people to really have a go and give it their full attention and focus. It's easier to say, oh, I probably could have done that, but I didn't want to give it a go because, this is kind of subconscious thinking. I might not have succeeded or failed. And people in our culture tend to dislike making mistakes or getting beaten or whatever it might be. So quite early on in childhood, we learn to be casual and cool and value the mediocre rather than the extraordinary or the excellent. And I think that's a real shame. So the sky's the limit is a kind of a bit of a cliche, I know, but it's a metaphor which captures this idea that we've got no idea what we're really capable of. And I've certainly had this sense in various things. I suppose the first thing that comes to mind is when I did a triathlon at the age of 61, an Ironman, in fact, a very long one. I really didn't know if I was going to be able to accomplish it. Neither did my coach, for that matter, and my family. In the event, I did, and I was very joyful that I achieved my goals. Even if I hadn't achieved.
We've lost your audio, Peter, for some reason. Try page refresh your side, and let's see if we can get the audio back. So actually, whilst Peter's coming back in, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the program we're currently running at Brilliantio. It's called Courseathon, and actually Peter is the perfect guest for this particular topic because, as he's just told you, he's actually comes from an Ironman background. He did a triathlon, comparatively recently. I think we've got your audio back. I was just about to take away to a little explainer on the Courseathon. But anyway, okay, let's circle back. Hey, Peter. Hi. Nice to have you back.
Nice to be back.
You were saying, yeah.
I've been muted. No, I'm back.
Back.
Look, it's kind of, we unwittingly sabotage ourselves, I think, from pursuing what we love to do or might like to explore in case we fail. And so it's easier to say, well, I never really gave it my best shot. I kind of could have if I'd wanted to, but I let myself off the hook by not giving it my best shot. And
Now
I think that's a shame, because in my experience, I've had great deal of joy and satisfaction and sense of fulfillment in doing things I didn't know whether I could do or not, or doing them better than I thought might have been possible.
Right.
And I also think that makes a valuable contribution to others. Without getting, you might ask me about this, but expertise is a kind of term that's got mixed connotations in our culture. But the good side of expertise is that it's valuable for people to become expert or masterly or whatever in things that are worthwhile, because in so doing, they're valuing quality. And that is good for the person, and it's good for those that they serve or whatever they do in the world.
Now, I have to say, whenever I hear the word quality, and particularly sometimes in this context, I always think of the wonderful Robert Pirsig book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, right? And you remember how in that book, there's a discussion about quality and the fact that we all know what quality is. We feel it, and yet it's almost impossible to actually define it. How do we actually, we can't sort of, assign a number to it, despite the endless efforts of the quality standards people.
Totally, but it's a bit like love. Everybody knows what it is, but nobody can explain it because it's I don't know what it is, but it's a mixture of a concept and a feeling and just a sense of knowing, which is pre-verbal, I suppose, in many ways. So I reckon that I too have been very inspired by Robert Pirsig. And in fact, he was an inspiration too for a guy called Josh Waitzkin, who I've studied at some length.
Right.
And it's all about quality, really, the valuing of quality, which his book is a parable, an allegory or whatever about that in the context of a road trip. It's not really about motorcycle maintenance, of course, but it serves the purpose of showing how, particularly in this highly sophisticated technological age, in some senses, we've lost something about artistry and quality and craftsmanship and pride in doing those kinds of things. Not entirely, of course, but there's a tendency, it's the throwaway society and the consumerist society.
We're going to circle back to that in a moment. We've had a couple of questions come in also on basically how to help teenagers and basically how to lure kids away from games, or at least perhaps we'll dive into this, how perhaps to use games as part of a learning journey. But anyhow, but before we get into all of that, I just want to kind of backstep you a bit, really, because I mean, you're in or have been in a university environment, right, as a professor. So you've sort of seen, if you like, the learning experiences of, others in that kind of environment. I mean, both your colleagues and indeed the students in, in a university setting, right? But I wonder, I mean, if you were to cast your mind back and think about where the learning journey for you started and when you first became conscious that actually learning how to learn is something that's important. When did that kind of start for you? Where were you before, just before that realization came through? And how did it come about?
I can go right back to school, quite frankly. I remember given the honor of captaining the school first 11, the cricket team. And I was passionate about pursuing quality in making myself A, a better cricketer, and B, a better captain or leader, inspiration, whatever, for the team of players that assembled around us. And I was very focused on that as a young lad. The transition from learning per se to meta-learning, or learning how to learn, that started to come, I think, when I was probably in my 30s, when I can't remember her name now, but I studied a woman who ran a program called Learning to Learn. And that really started to get those ideas into my head. And it certainly was manifest in business, because I've been in book selling and really focused on empowering my team and that kind of thing. And then when I read Josh Waitzkin's book, The Art of Learning, his journey towards excellence, he speaks about how when he achieved great elite status as a young chess player, as a schoolboy, won all the age championships right through until he was 16. And things happened, which I won't go into here, and he left chess. And then a year or two later, he came back and decided, he just walked into a Tai Chi martial arts studio in New York City and decided he'd take up Tai Chi, at the age of 21 or something of that nature. Within 4 years, he won a world championship in Tai Chi Chuan, which is extraordinary in that it took so little time, and he wasn't doing it from the age of 6 or anything. And in his book, he talks about how what he learned in chess, he was able to apply or transfer that learning to Tai Chi, or indeed to anything he sets his mind to and wants to. And I found the same thing. Being able to achieve an Ironman at the tender age of 61 helped me to believe that I could do a PhD at 69 or 70. Because the learning about me and it's got a lot to do with emotional things too. Self-confidence and the joy one gets in learning and achieving and performing at one's best level is transferable into anything. Indeed, I probably wouldn't have undertaken this program that I've been doing with you, Paul, had I not experienced the joy of overcoming challenges and difficulties and knowing that learning is an incremental process anyway. Yeah. Much more to do with the effort that we put in than any talent we might have.
Before I kind of let you off the hook, I also really have another go at kind of baiting this particular lure, which is to basically say, can you remember before this learning how to learn and kind of digging into that and basically learning more about that process, if you like, was that something you stumbled upon, or was it something that you actually actively sought out? Do you remember?
Oh, I stumbled. My life has been a series of stumbles, I'm quite sure. It's like I follow the energy and seek to express myself as creatively as possible in as unfettered a way as possible. And it's a lifelong journey. I'm by no means there yet, but I see that evolution towards enjoyment in pursuing quality. And, I don't know whether this is perhaps getting to your question, but I think it might be interesting for people who happen to be watching this, that learning about the subconscious self-theories we have about ourselves. We think we're innately born with these talents and these shortcomings. We're no good at maths or music, or we're no good at athletics or whatever. Those things sometimes are conscious and sometimes are unconscious, but they may not be true. They may simply be ideas we have about ourselves because of experiences we've had as children and so on. And if we think that our capacity to learn, perform and achieve is based on talent and what we've inherited in our genes and so on, then we miss what we now know to be true from developmental psychology. And that is that if we have the right attitude towards learning, for example, if we see that intelligence has got more to do with our attitude towards whether it can be developed or not, or whether it's given, that makes a huge difference, because then we see it being a slow process and every success begins with failures and you've got to make lots of mistakes. But if you see it more like a muscle that can be built, I'm talking about intelligence in this case, rather than eye color, which can't be changed, you're just given what you're given at birth, then it makes a huge difference to how we go about life,
Right. Yeah,
including anything we might see as a possibility or a challenge.
Peter, I'm gonna ask you to do the hand focus trick again, but first of all, I want to explain to the audience what that is. Now, guys, when you're at on your webcam and live streaming on Zoom or whatever it might be, what can sometimes happen is a camera can hunt focus, right? And so basically, it'll lose focus on you and focus on the background, particularly if you're against a brick wall. So here's a hot tip. Okay, what you do is you put your hand out towards the webcam and you bring it very slowly back. I bet it goes wrong now. Okay. And what you're trying to do is to get the camera to pick up all those little lines on your hand, right? And then you bring the hand back to the face, and it rather looks like you're saluting. And then hopefully you should be back in focus. Peter, you're back in focus. Great.
Do I look beautiful now too?
So astonishing. Simply stunning. I tell you, I should have one of those photo backdrops here, but it's an old country cottage. Well, look, I will actually dive into some of the questions, in fact, straight away.
Yes.
So we've had a question here, which is, I'm curious about how to motivate teenagers to strive and find their intrinsic motivation. And there's a kind of follow-up question in there. The lure of online gaming with friends is so instantly satisfying and gratifying. So I think this kind of questioner is basically asking, what do we do about teenagers? How do we help them?
They're great questions. They relate to what I have learned, and that is that the main thing about learning is passion and engagement. If our, it's following the energy, if you like. So adults like to be critical of gaming, and we like to be critical of the idea that, and we're frightened if teenagers spend so much time gaming. But I think that the more we put our anxiety onto them about that, the worse it gets in a way. They will probably, I've just been reading Ed Snowden's autobiography, the whistleblower, and he was so enthralled by the Wild West of the early stages of the internet and the web back in the 1990s when he was a teenager. He would stay up all night working on the computer and deceive his parents as much as he could, sleep at school. He worked out ways to hack the school system. I don't mean the computer system, I mean to work out what he could do to get by, because it didn't interest him. Of course, he learned and became extraordinary, not just as a computer operator in the intelligence community, but he acquired a great deal of social and political sensibilities as well. So in a way, it's more important how we do things than what we're doing. We might find our way, So look, it is true that focus is important. And that's one of the things that's really lacking. We live in a multitasking society, and people's attention and focus is very limited, which means it's difficult to go deep and to savor things and to really explore things. So I wouldn't worry too much about a teenager who wants to be on the computer. And the more that a parent tends to resist that, the more strongly the teenager is likely to push back and find devious ways of getting around it.
Right.
People have got to find their passion. And
I think when you said that, what matters is not so much what you're learning or perhaps even what you're up to, but how you're learning or how you're doing it. That's a very interesting idea. That where does that flow from? Why does that matter? So that's two questions, but but take them in whichever order you choose. But there's something important there, right?
Well, there is something important in there, because I think the essential thing, as I see it, is that there's got to be a fit, an alignment between who I am and what I'm learning. And we live in a world where right from birth. Parents with the best of intentions want to mould us in a particular way. And certainly teachers do at school, and it goes right on to university and workplaces and so on. So some of us become compliant and predictable, and we do the right things, we're good, and we get ticks and whatever. Others find that absolutely hideous and rebel, which is not necessarily being who you are, but it's a reaction to outrage very often at being told to do what you don't want to do. I was very interested, this comes back to something you asked me earlier. I was very influenced by Wilhelm Reich and A.S. Neil, the Scottish school teacher with Summerhill, all about the idea, and Joseph Chilton Pearce with Magical Child, all about the idea that we innately have the ability to self-regulate and find our own way in the world. A.S. Neil used to say, mathematics is too important to be made compulsory.
Right. Actually, this
is what I'm getting at.
This makes me think also of Sir Ken Robinson's wonderful TED Talk. You've seen it, right? Which I think is very closely aligned to his book, The Element, and this idea, and the story that I always remember from that book is the story of the mother who's desperate with her child. Do you remember the story with her daughter? And nothing's working. It simply isn't working in school. There's no attention, no interest whatsoever. And so she's sitting with the child psychologist, and fortunately with a good one. And the child psychologist basically just put some music on in the room. And he said, "Okay, let's just step out for a minute, right?" And there was a peephole. And he encouraged the mum to look through the peephole, and of course the daughter was dancing. Cue a ballerina career. and
you know who that was?
She'd found no.
Gillian Gish, who went on and married Andrew Lloyd Webber, I believe, and the rest is history. She was a premier ballerina, and then she got involved with the creation of those extraordinary musicals, Phantom of the Opera and all the rest of it. But as Sir Ken says, she may have been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder because of her jumping around in the classroom rather than sitting down and doing boring clerical work 6 hours a day. She was a dancer, nothing wrong with her. She suffered from the problem of being a child.
Well, look, I ought to rattle through some more of these questions because could you comment on curiosity and being comfortable in being uncomfortable in unknown learning spaces? I'm actually going to read that question. It's an interesting question. Now, could you comment on curiosity and being comfortable in being uncomfortable in unknown learning spaces?
Well, this is a great question too, because it brings to my mind a kind of a paradox. We kind of think, there's an old joke that a PhD or some sort of scholarly expert in some area knows more and more about less and less until they know everything about nothing. And the thing that I've noticed is that with people that are experts or masterly in any particular area, they are the most humble because they realize how little they know about this mysterious thing, which is consciousness, life, existence, that we're all immersed in and just take for granted.
Right.
So curiosity, asking questions is the most exciting and interesting things to do. But unfortunately, we grow up in a school environment where answers are more important than questions. And the trouble with answers is that they very often close off further inquiry or curiosity.
Right.
So the best answers lead to more questions. It's like an ongoing, never-ending process. And quite frankly, I don't think, with all our knowledge and learning and all the information that's been exploding exponentially in the world for decades, we're any closer to understanding anything that's really important about existence and consciousness and the universe. I mean, we do know some things, but a lot of our so-called knowledge we will be unlearning or realizing was wrong in the future, just like things in the past. If we have any historical sense, we know that so many things in the past were considered to be true or valid or right at the time, but we now know that they were limited or simply wrong.
Absolutely.
And that process is likely to go on forever, I think, anyway.
It's interesting you mentioned consciousness. I mean, my father was trained as a biologist, and then he was a PhD in entomology, in fact. And he had a career as a school teacher, actually, eventually. But I remember, and he's now 90. But I remember him telling me about a year ago that, to his knowledge, a lot of the finest scientific minds, regardless of the discipline, doesn't matter whether it's out of physics, maths, whatever, that very often they gravitate towards becoming fascinated and it's like a compulsion to explore consciousness as the topic, as the thing that matters, right? And this kind of eats them up to the end of their days, in their work.
That's right. It's known as the big problem in philosophy and psychology and so on. And consciousness studies are growing, but there's no doubt that one of the problems with knowledge and its proliferation is that we get to be under the illusion that it's going to provide answers. And one of the reasons that it may not, in the way in which we see it, is that we're very unbalanced. We totally value specialization, taking things apart. There are umpteen dozen sub-disciplines within the discipline of psychology, for example, and the people don't necessarily even talk to each other. They have different agendas, they have different language that they speak and theoretical constructs. So while specialization is really important for some areas, what we need is a holistic overview of things and bring everything together. A bit like, when you light a stage in a theatre, if you just have one color light on it, you only see it through that lens, through that color. You turn that light and put another light on, an economics light or a political science light, psychology light or whatever. You're never seeing the stage. You've got to have all the lights on at once, but not separately at once. And better still would be the sunlight. It's kind of a way of looking at how we break things up and don't necessarily put them together again in a way, which is one of the reasons why we have so many so-called wicked problems that nobody knows how to do anything about, like refugees, for example.
Yeah, right. Actually, this conversation makes me think of, now and again, I tune into Alan Watts, of course, and there's all these wonderful, tape recordings, usually with some chap coughing or hemming and hawing very close by, usually with airplanes going over, kind of terrible sound quality, but this kind of, radio electric voice that he had, which is just perfect for radio.
Yes.
And indeed for the lectures, right? But I remember in one of his wonderful lectures, him saying something like, the purpose, and of course he's laughing all the time, right, as he's speaking, and it's the purpose of why are we here? What's the point? What's the point? What on earth are we doing here? And I remember that he came up with this beautiful idea. I'm not sure whether it's his or whether he borrowed it. We're here to dance. We're here to dance. To dance. We're here to dance. We're here to
dance. Yes.
To dance. Yeah, to dance. In the broadest, meaning of the word. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Or play. Play is another way of looking at it.
Right.
Seeing everything as a game. Certainly, the university's a game. I've just been, as you know, doing another course on whether or not it's a good idea to go to university for X person or Y person, and seeing it as a game helps a lot. And that helps a lot for people to get through school as well, seeing it in that way.
Yeah. Another question came in here, which is, to what degree do you think what we know gets in the way of what we need to learn? These are tough questions. These are tough questions coming in.
Well, would you like? Maybe I could pass them on to somebody else. I think a lot. This is one of the maybe it's a paradox around knowledge. Knowledge can be good in that it's better to be informed, rather than to go in naively and ignorantly often into a situation. But it's also entrapping. I understand it because based on what we know, we have a kind of an emotional investment in that too. So we like to defend what we know more than explore what we don't know. And we see this time and time again. I believe, I forget his name now, but a prominent Australian physicist was a few years ago hired by the American cancer people. And he said, I know nothing about cancer. And they said, no, but that's why we're hiring you, because you're not coming in with all these preconceived ideas about what's possible and what works and what doesn't work. Right. So knowledge can be entrapping as well as liberating.
Right.
So that's why openness and preparedness, and to hold things lightly, to recognize that what we know or think we know may be wrong. Yeah. And it's probably likely to be wrong.
Actually, I'll chip in something here, which is that, you know, as some people watching this may know, I come out of a film directing background. I spent 30 years directing, you know, documentary films around the world, and I'm an audiobook narrator and, you know, and a wannabe writer. And what I know from that sort of storytelling background, if you like, is that sometimes deliberate disruption in with the lens with which you see something can be an incredibly valuable thing, right? And I often wondered why I would often read magazines, or sometimes, God forbid, even books backwards. I would actually go to the end of the magazine or the end of the book and actually deliberately kind of go backwards through them. And I thought I must be kind of crazy or something, right? And then when I started film directing, I realized that actually this was a wonderful technique for, you know, for film, because basically you can imagine the final scene in the film, the final emotion, and actually then you align everything you're doing with the, you know, with the film through a different lens, right? Or sometimes one of the most valuable lessons I learned from an executive producer at the BBC was basically about viewing things at speed to break time, to actually understand the sequence of something better, which was another technique in, you know, in editing and how to stitch things together. So, you know, when we're talking about, you know, I guess how to learn, right, and how to kind of get preconceived notions out of the way, it seems to me that actually trying to change the lens, right, and trying to you know, to deliberately see things in a different way, put yourself in a different position, right, kind of walk across the room and look from a different angle, you know, somehow matters, right?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I think one of the biggest mistakes we quite understandably make, because it's part of the human condition, is we forget that we're actually looking at the world, at existence. The world view we have, if you like, is simply the frame or the lens, the frame that we have. That your frame is different from my frame, inevitably, for all sorts of reasons. But I tend to think that my frame is the frame. And if you don't see things the way I see them, there's something wrong with you. And that leads, of course, to extraordinary conflicts between human beings, etc. But if I remember that I'm just seeing the world through my frame, and that you're seeing it through your frame, and that if we've got a problem or an issue that a group of people are looking at, it's very, very useful. In fact, it's essential to hear the perspectives or the descriptions or the account of how each person sees that, without thinking that one person's point of view is any more important or real than any others. And out of that, we call it a warm data thing, something we can't do here on a you know, because if I'm in a classroom with students or in a room with people, there's a lot more communication and information being exchanged than just the voice or even the picture. There's all sorts of subtle things, most of which are below consciousness, certainly below sensory awareness at any rate. And so, you know, when you have people open to listening to other people and reviewing, you know, when there's a conflict or a disagreement, if people can say to themselves, that's interesting, I wonder why I had that emotional reaction to what that person said.
Mm.
I might learn, if that's the case, as to what's going on with my assumptions. Then I might review them and change them or not. But it's very different from this, attack and defend stance, trying to win an argument kind of thing.
Yeah. I remember the saying of a very wise man who I had the privilege to meet a few years ago, saying to me that and he came out of a Buddhist background, right? And I remember him telling me, 1,000 people, 1,000 thoughts. A rather wonderful way of summarizing what's what is really going on here, right? Sean has chipped in that he's asking whether it's a kaleidoscope. Yeah, Sean is using the word kaleidoscope. It's a nice question.
Yes, it is a nice, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Well, look, this is probably a good moment to actually skip over to your course, the course that you've made, at least the first course that you've made.
Yes.
Limit. Now, before we do that, I'm going to try something I've not tried before, which is very risky. I'm actually going to try and play just literally 30 seconds of the introduction of the course, so people can have a little preview of it. So hang on, let me see if I can get this working. Anything could happen here, Peter. So so here we go. I think we're up at the top of the course. Let's have a look.
To maintain our body temperature. And many other
so I've got to back it. I've got to back it. I've got to look around my camera here.
Welcome to The Sky is the Limit, your learning journey towards excellence. There's quite a lot in that title, and it really captures the idea that this is an introductory program on the art of learning. Strange, what's the art of learning? We have programs on the art of writing, the art of photography, the art of this.
So I won't torture you too much with that, Peter, because I know it's a bit like navel using your own course. But I mean, this, the mind map kind of gives some sense of, the agenda of the course. Where does this course bottom out? Actually, what is the kind of the thing in the course that you think people will take most away from? Where's the kind of real focal?
Well, I am hoping that people will recognize that they perhaps have more potential to learn and achieve and perform and do whatever their heart desires. That they will see that what they do with their precious gift of life is essentially unlimited as to what's possible. Now, I'm not talking about winning the Olympic Games 100 meters when you're 50 years of age or anything like that, but I am talking about creative ways in which people might want to explore, express, create, do things. And I think what I've learned and what I'm enjoying the opportunity to share in this course is what I've learned about the barriers to doing that and the pitfalls and traps that people can fall into, and how by focusing on the mindset, the attitudinal or mindset aspects and the quality of effort, then who knows what's possible. So that's what I'm sharing.
Yeah, right. And so look,
if I just add this one thing, if I may, it's come out of a mixture of my life experience and my research, if you will.
Yeah, which is the most wonderful thing about it, I find it, because you have all the academic references and you have all of that stuff around, of course, and learning methodologies, la-di-da-di-da. But at the end of the day, what I think is so wonderful about these courses, at least in the way that we try to do them, and we're working with people like you to co-produce and publish and promote courses, is that actually it's drawing on the life experience of people. This is the thing, right? It's flowing out of what you know to be true because you've actually done it. You've actually experienced it. Yeah.
Yes, and I just want to add this, if I may, that one of the challenges, probably the biggest challenges I've faced in creating this course, which is the first course, online course that I've created, has been the lack of warm data, if you like. Like, I have to imagine that behind the camera that I'm looking at now, there's a real live person, but I can't see the expression on their face. I can't see if their eyes are shining or if they're yawning or bored or tired. In a room, I can see those things and make adjustments accordingly, either subconsciously or consciously. So it's been very challenging for me to make that transition from speaking with people and listening, which is an interactive thing, and simply talking to a funny little hole in a camera. And I'm learning slightly and slowly to make that imaginative transition.
It is a very, I mean, I spent a long time in my life behind the lens as the director. And then more recently, I've had to step in front of a camera, right? And I find that a technique a friend of mine taught me, actually, to try to get past this thing you've identified as a challenge. And this friend is connected to the acting world and the theatre world, and he explained this concept of a bubble. There's an energetic bubble for an actor, right? And so whether it's on the stage, whether it's all the way to the back of the theatre, or on a movie set, it might be, say, between the camera to whatever. But you're almost sort of filling this projective space, as you're acting, as you're trying to, and this is the way an actor can whisper on stage and be heard at the back of a theatre, because it's through this visualization of actually what the energy space is, that one is filling. But when I teach online, I try to imagine that the other person's actually there with me, right? And so we have this very curious time, it seems to me, where everything is in huge change now, of course. I mean, massive disruptive change, right? And I imagine that's very true in the world of education and the world of learning, the world of of skills attainment and everything else. And so it seems to me it's even more important to try to cultivate this ability to sense the kind of the audience and the students around, if you like, even though we have this artificial construct of a webcam and a computer and everything else. Right? It's something I think we're going to have to learn.
Exactly. It's a fascinating challenge, and I'm relishing it. It's scary and enjoyable. That's another thing I've discovered, that the most challenging and scary things are often the most fulfilling as one develops some degree of competence, and maybe then, if you keep going, proficiency at doing something.
Actually, there's a comment come in here saying there's a big push from the government in Ontario, Canada, to move most of the school classes to online learning, and this was happening even before COVID. Parents and teachers are not at all happy. What do you think?
Well, I think that blended. I think online's got its advantages and it's got its disadvantages. Same with physical stuff. I mean, one of the beauties, of course, of this is that we can reach people. People can tap into things irrespective of geography, as long as they've got a good connection, right? So, and it can be asynchronous, so people can watch later or whatever. But as I said earlier, there's no substitute for actually sitting down in the same face-to-face presence as another human being and being present there with that person, awake to who they are. And if there's a meeting of minds, because they're interested in me and I'm interested in them, then magic can happen. But we all understand the commercial pressures towards, quite apart from pandemics, the commercial pressures towards roboticization and the movement increasingly to so-called e-learning and away from the classroom.
Right.
But that's another story.
Well, the story that I can't let you slide away from, just as we close this one, is the story of the doing an Ironman at what, 69? Did you say?
No.
Did I miss here, or 61?
I did a PhD. I got my PhD at 60.
PhD was 69, but
I
the
did
Ironman
an Ironman at 61.
Yeah, but even so, I mean,
Hope for you yet, Paul.
I'm 54, and that makes me quake in my boots. And I used to be quite active earlier in life. How on earth do you get past an Ironman?
Past it?
Yeah, well, how do you get it done? How do you? I mean, there's a lot of pain and suffering involved there.
Well, my idea, swimming was my biggest challenge, because my idea of swimming was staying alive in the water. But, it's not good enough staying alive in the water. You've got to swim a long way, nearly 4 kilometers, which is quite a ways. In fact, my 15-year-old used to say to me when I'd come home very excited a couple of months out from the Ironman, say, I've ridden 150 kilometers today, and then went for a 10K run, and he'd shrug his shoulders and say, well, yeah, but how are you going to swim 4K and then run 180K and then run a full 42K marathon? And I say, I don't know, but I think I might be able to do it.
Right.
So you do need, it's the nearest thing, I suppose. They say this about a marathon or an Ironman. It's the nearest thing that a man can have to having a child, because you can prepare. It takes a year to prepare. Anyone can do it if they really work on it in a systematic way and build up condition. It's, you don't do too much too soon. You have recovery phases. I had a program and a great coach. Without my coach, I don't think I would have achieved it, which is another thing about learning and expertise. Everyone needs a good support team.
Right.
No one does things alone.
Yeah.
So, we need lots of support. So I don't know. I just did it.
Something, after you do the university course, that's the next one I'm going to ask you to do. Actually, I'm going to impale you, to impugn on you. Is that the word? To make that course, how to do that.
You're a hard taskmaster, Paul.
Well, look, everyone, can I encourage you, if you've enjoyed this presentation, to basically enroll in Peter's class? Yeah, it's basically about $10 on Udemy, which is an absolute steal for the wisdom and insight and teaching you're going to find inside this course, which I think should be readily apparent from the exchange that's just happened. Yeah, so if you'd actually like to really delve into learning about learning and the joy and passion of that, why not check out The Sky's the Limit on Udemy? Yeah, and there's a link should be scrolling below on a kind of news style ticker tape, so you can either go to brilliantio.net/sky, or simply go onto udemy.com and search The Sky's the Limit, and you should be able to find the course there. But look, Peter, thank you so much for joining me here today. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. I love talking with people about interesting things, and this has been a great opportunity to do that. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Fantastic. And actually, if you're catching this presentation on replay, do feel free to pop a comment in the box, because the chances are that Peter's going to spot it at some point, or I'll spot it and sling it across to Peter. And so, even if you're seeing this on replay and have a question, do feel free to pop it in the comments. And obviously, like and subscribe the video, and subscribe to the channel if you could, because that'll help us grow at these very early days. Okay, everyone, look, take care. Peter, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.